Greetings, detectives. Mrs. McKay here, and we're ready to work on our fourth clue for case 8. So we'll be more than halfway through when we get done with this clue. All right. So let's go ahead and get started by writing our learning target clue. This clue is about box and whisker plots. So go ahead and write. I can create and interpret a box and whisker. Go ahead and write the word plot since I forgot to type it in. Box and whisker plot, comma. It's interquartile. It's a big word. Interquartile range, which we abbreviate with IQR, and percentile ranks. So we have a lot to cover. So hang on and let's see how much we can get done. And so we want to create and interpret a box and whisker plot. It's interquartile range, IQR, and percentile ranks of a data set. Now let's quickly review what we already know. We already know how to represent data using 4 different types of tables or graphs. We have line plots, which basically are lines. We also call them dot plots, where if we have data, we just represent it by dots or X's. Okay? And so every piece of data is represented on the number line by a dot, and if you have more than one, you stack them up. We have histograms. Histograms, which are like bar graphs, but they're vertical, and they don't have any space in between them. And they are ranges. These bars are called bins, and they have ranges that might be 1 to 5 or 1,000 to 3,000, just depends on your data. Okay? We also talked about frequency tables, where you have your data, and then you have how many times it occurs. So you might list your data as 1, 2, maybe you have scores or something, and how many times that data occurs. So if 1 occurs 4 times, you put a 4, and if 2 occurs 3 times, you put 3. If 3 occurs 1 time, you put a 1. And then we talked about adding a third column, which was the cumulative, and so then we're just adding things up. Okay? So that's what we worked on in the past, and now I'm just going to erase this so I have room. We're going to talk about box and whisker plots, which is another way to represent data. It's called box and whisker plots because it describes what it looks like. It's a box with lines coming off the edges on one side or the other. It looks like a mustache or whiskers coming off this box. So it's a box with whiskers. Okay? So we're gonna take a look at our problem here about Coach Peterson. Coach Peterson's football team is having a tough season. The team is struggling to win games. He is trying to determine why his team has only won a few times this year. The table shows the points scored in games from last year and this year. So we're going to start by creating a box and whisker plot for last year's scores. Now, whenever you create a box and whisker plot, one of the first things you have to do is you have to make sure that your data is in order from smallest to largest. And so we've already done that with this table because I didn't want to waste the time. We've got our scores. We've got 11 scores, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yep. 11 scores from the lowest score to the highest score that the team got or played when they played football last year. All right, now when we create a box and whisker plot, we have to find bits and pieces. We have to find some information from this. And so where I've written over here in this sidebar, I've created a little list of the things that we're going to need to find. So the first thing that we're going to need to find, and we'll start with last year's, is the minimum, and the minimum is just the smallest number. So you can see that the smallest number is 10, right? And then the maximum is the largest score, which is 35. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to figure out what the range is, and all that means is how many points are covered from the smallest to the largest. So that means what's the spread of the points. So the way that we figure out the range is we simply subtract 35 minus 10. So we take the minimum from the maximum, and that tells us there's a range of 20 points. Okay? Next thing we want to do is figure out the median. So when we figure out the median, we're going to look at our list of numbers, and we're going to just hop into the middle. And there is my median. My median is 24. It's the very middle score. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to find the quartiles. Quartiles. Let me write it over here so you can see what I'm saying. Quartile. A quartile sounds a lot like a quarter, doesn't it? And a quarter is just a fourth. If we say I want a quarter of a pie, it means I want a fourth of a pie. If we talk about money and we talk about a quarter is 25 cents, which is a fourth of a dollar. So a quartile means a fourth. And Q1 means quartile 1, and that means the first quarter of this data. So quartile 1 is at the 25% mark. So let's go ahead and see if we can figure out how we do that. Well, the way we would do it is we take our bottom half, because this bottom half is the bottom 50%, and the top half is the top 50%, and I want to find the median of the bottom half. So if I take this and I go here and here, then I can see that my middle number is 17. So I just found the median of this group of numbers right here. Okay? So my quartile 1 is 17. And my quartile 2, or quartile 3, sorry, my quartile 2 is actually my median, which is 24. My quartile 3 is 28. So now I have my minimum, my maximum, I know what my range is, I know my median, which is 24, my quartile 1, which is a division of my bottom half, and my quartile 3, which is a division of my top half. All right? So if we were going to say that these were percentages, we would say this is 25%, this is 50%, this is 75%. See that? How we've divided it into 4 sections? Okay. So now let's go ahead and create our box and whisker plot. We start by, this is the way I do it. I start by plotting my minimum. So on my line down here, and we always use a line, okay? And on my line, I'm going to mark it. I know that I'm going to be marking last year's scores as well, and last year's scores have a 0 as a minimum and a 45 as a maximum. So I need to make sure that my line has a 0 to a 45. So I'm going to start by saying this is 0. And I'm going to count by 2. Each mark is going to be 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 20, 2, 4, 6, 8, 30. You should be doing this too. 2, 4, 6, 8, 40. Now I can go ahead and plot my, or graph my, create my box and whisker plot. So I'm going to start by first plotting a point at my minimum, which is 10. So I'm going to do it up here. It's my first. That's my minimum. And I'm going to do my maximum as well, which is 2, 4, right about Okay? So I have my minimum and my maximum, and you can see that my range is from 10 to 35, which is, if I counted it, it would be 10, 20, 5. So my range is, whoops, should have been 25, not 20. Anybody catch that mistake? Okay. 35 minus 10 is 25, not 20. Okay. Next thing I want to do is I want to mark my median. And my median is at 24, so 2, 4, and I'm going to make a straight line, a vertical line like that. Okay, that's marking my median. Then I'm going to mark my interquartile, or my quartile 1, and my quartile 1 is at 17, so here's 2, 4, 6, 7, would be right about there. And my Q3, or quartile 3, is at 28, so this would be right here. And now that I have each of my quartiles marked, my minimum, my Q1, my median, my Q3, and my maximum, I'm now going to finish this off by connecting things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a box that connects my Q1 and my Q3, and it has the median inside it. All right? And then I'm going to connect with a horizontal line from my maximum to my Q3 and from my minimum to my Q1. And now I've created a box and whisker plot, and this box and whisker plot represents my data. This is my minimum, this is my Q1, this is my median, this is my Q3, and this is my maximum. Okay? Now, there's one more thing that we want to figure out, and that is, what is the interquartile range? And that means, what is the range in the box between Q1 and Q3? Okay? What's that range? Well, all I have to do is take Q3, 28, and subtract Q1, which is 17, and that will tell me that my interquartile range should be 11. That means there are 11 points between Q1 and Q3. So what's inside my box? And what's inside my box is the top 50% of my scores. So, not the top, the middle 50% of my scores. The top 50% would be from the median to the maximum. The bottom 50% would be from the median to the minimum. But my interquartile range, my middle 50%, is from Q1 to Q3. Okay? Now that we know how to do that, we know how to actually create this box and whisker plot, let's go ahead and create another one. And we'll do it above the last year's, and we'll create this year's. So let's create an interquartile. Let's create a box and whisker plot for the points scored this year. So let's do that in a different color. And why don't you go ahead and plot the minimum and the maximum. So I came up with my minimum is 0, and my maximum is 45, and my range is going to be what? It's going to be 45, isn't it? Because 45 minus 0 is 45. Now, go ahead and take a minute and figure out the median, and the Q1, and the Q3. Okay, so I came up with, my median was 24, which was the same as last year's. And then my Q1 was 17, same as last year's. And my Q3 was 25, which was lower than last year's. Now, what would the interquartile range be? See if you can figure that out. Well, you should have taken 25 and subtracted from 17, and you would have gotten 8. Last thing I want you to do for this video is to go ahead and graph or create your box and whisker plot. So go ahead and create your box and whisker plot. Okay, so what did you notice? Did you get your box and whisker plot created? It should look something like that. It's definitely different than last year's, isn't it? And so we'll come back to our next video and we'll talk about that. We'll answer some of these questions, and we'll talk about outliers and percentiles.